Today, we'll be taking a look at Rainbow Six Siege on the PS4 and the Potato Masher. If this is the first video you've seen of mine, the Potato Masher is a $375 PC custom built in 2014 and designed to compete with the PS4 for the rest of its life cycle. The goal is not to pick on consoles, but to show that PC gaming can be just as good or better for the same money. The project was started by the Casual Shenanigans Gaming Podcast, so go check us out using the link on screen. You can support the Potato Masher project and my channel by tossing me a few bucks on Patreon, where you can also see all Potato Masher reviews a few days early. Lastly, I want to thank Casual Shenanigans community member Tyler for letting me borrow his Uplay account to do this review. Click the link on screen to go see his channel. Alright, let's get to it. On the PS4, Rainbow Six Siege runs at 1080p and 30 FPS during training missions and other challenges that feature AI players. It runs at 1080p and 60 FPS during online multiplayer, which seems like an odd choice to me. On the Potato Masher, online multiplayer ran slightly worse than any of the training, so I'm not sure why the PS4 drops to 30 FPS in those modes which should theoretically run better. However, more interesting is the new rendering solution that Siege is using. Temporal filtering renders the game at half resolution and then applies 2x multi-sample anti-aliasing on top to smooth the final image out. There are the same number of depth samples as 1080p, but only a quarter of the shader samples. This gives a great boost in performance, but it does mean the game is not running at a true 1080p if you want to be really particular. Since the PS4 and Xbox One both use this method to hit 60 FPS, I used it on the Potato Masher. Here you can see some comparison shots. I had to drop the Potato Masher to low settings to maintain 60 FPS when temporal filtering was turned off, and it could manage high settings with it on. It is most noticeable in the shimmering you see on vertical and horizontal lines, and in the reduction in detail for distant objects. Truthfully, when the game is in full swing, it's usually not noticeable. It does look much better than upscaled 720p, so it's a decent solution for when a game engine is extremely demanding on older hardware. The advanced lighting, shadows, and reflections available at high settings are worth freeing up some system overhead by turning on temporal filtering, in my opinion. Enough of that though, how does the Potato Masher compare to the PS4 visually? Well, pretty good as you can see. Most textures appear to be identical, although the Potato Masher did look superior in several instances. Lighting and shadows appear to be very similar, although the PS4 does look a little flatter and has fewer individual light sources, which is something pretty normal that I see in a lot of PS4 games. Dynamic lighting effects like explosions also have a little more punch to them on the Potato Masher and more particle effects, but it's harder to see the difference unless you slow the footage down. The RAM usage stayed fairly low as well. I didn't test the game with 4GB, but I think it would have worked fine. The Potato Masher's frame rate was very stable in the training missions, but I did notice a drop or two in the multiplayer. These were drops of only 3 to 5 frames per second, and I wouldn't have noticed it if I didn't have a frame rate counter running. There were many more variables that can affect frame rate and frame times when you're playing online, and I can't measure to see if the PS4 is affected in the same way. I dropped the settings to medium and the drops went away completely. The game looked almost identical, so that would be a good solution if you experience similar issues. Both versions of the game really do look great. Any differences are small and aren't easily noticeable unless you're looking for them. I do think that the Potato Masher has a large advantage over the PS4 in that you can adjust your field of view in the game. For a competitive online shooter, having a proper field of view can make a big difference. This is of course subject to the player's preference, but I think that's another big win for the PC version of the game. Just for grids, I turned the game to very high settings and locked the frame rate at 30 FPS. It ran fine, so that's an option. After playing at 60, I don't know that I'd ever prefer 30 for a competitive game, but the Potato Masher could handle it. Now, it's much more likely that someone would want to use a faster refresh rate, like 144 or 120 Hz. I turned the settings down to very low at 1080p and tried for 144 FPS. I mostly used the second training course to test higher frame rates for consistency. You'll also notice that there is some screen tearing as I had to disable VSync to run at high frame rates on a 60 Hz monitor. The Potato Masher did get close to 144 FPS, but the CPU maxed out and wouldn't let it go quite that high. I turned the resolution down to 1024 by 768 and it still couldn't do it. Next, I tried 120 FPS at 1080p. This was much better. There were still occasional frame drops, but the experience was fairly stable. However, very low doesn't look that great, so I turned the resolution down to 900p. Then I was able to crank the settings to medium. Now, the game looked a bit better and still ran well. In multiplayer, the frame rate varied between 100 and 120. If I was trying to get the competitive benefits of a high refresh rate, I suppose I'd be fine with turning the resolution down. For more casual play, I'd still prefer to keep all games at least at the monitor's native resolution. Lastly, I was able to run 720p at high settings at 120 FPS. At this point, I think the temporal filtering was causing too many noticeable artifacts and visual issues to be considered good looking, so I didn't bother testing it for long. If I stayed at a lock 30 FPS, the Potato Masher could run 1440p at high settings. It looked great, but I wanted 60 if possible. For 60, I had to drop to low settings and there were still a few frame rate hitches. They didn't affect the gameplay, but they were there. If I were determined to play at 1440p on the Potato Masher, I'd probably lock the frame rate at 45 or 50 to get the benefits of a higher frame rate, but with a bit more stability. At 4K, the frame rate was mostly stable at low settings and with a 30 FPS lock. However, during large explosions or intense gunfights, there were numerous drops into the mid-20s. Dropping to very low didn't make this any better. I don't think the Potato Masher handled 4K well enough to use it on a regular basis, but it technically was playable. After Assassin's Creed Syndicate bogged down both the PS4 and the Potato Masher, I was worried that the engine would be similarly difficult with Rainbow Six Siege. Smaller world sizes and temporal filtering seem to make enough of a difference though, and the game runs very well. Even at low or medium settings, the game looks great. I might even go as far as to say that medium in Rainbow Six Siege looks as good as very high in Battlefield 3 or many other games that are only a few years old. Don't be afraid to lower settings to get good consistent performance, it's worth it. The Potato Masher delivered a visually superior experience and is playable at 60 FPS across all its game modes. The PS4 didn't do poorly, but I would have preferred a consistent frame rate and the ability to change the field of view. If you enjoyed this video, consider heading over to Patreon to help support the Potato Masher project. You can also click the links on screen to check out Casual Shenanigans or take a look at the original build video. That's all for now, so thank you for watching and have a great day.